tell the audience about how you got started in real estate. Jon, welcome to the show. I'm excited to share with the audience everything that you've taught me about industrial real estate and just paying it forward. So
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So let's get started. You didn't have the most traditional path to industrial broker, so let's take it back to the beginning of your career.
Yeah, so I'm originally from the Minnesota area. I went to college in North Dakota, Fargo, North Dakota, and I got invited to go on a skiing trip in Salt Lake City. And at the time where my mind was why would you go past Colorado or past Montana to this place called Salt Lake City? And then I came here and I found out what an amazing place this is. And spent the next probably 4 years of my life spending all of my vacation time just coming out here to go skiing or mountain biking or whatever it was. And then some good friends of mine that lived here, they were like, I think it's time for you to move here. And I'm like, all right, then let's find a job. And so the job that brought me out here is I worked at the Sundance Film Festival for 1 year. And while I was there, I met some military contractors that were doing some stuff as the Iraq conflict was kind of starting to go away. Because, man, this was like 10, 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And what ended up happening is I wanted to be here, but they heard that I went to college in North Dakota, and they brought me back to North Dakota to do what are called man camp housing projects in the oil fields of western North Dakota.
That sounds awful, by the way.
It was awful, but it was like what felt like an amazing Wild West experience. And some of the like we could have just a podcast about crazy stories of living in an oil field in a boom town.
We might be the first podcast to ever talk about North Dakota. Honestly.
Yes,
so
possibly.
Okay.
So anyways, beyond that, I always kept a foot in Salt Lake, married a lovely woman here. We now have a family, and ultimately, while I was here, I worked in property management of vacation rentals for a bit, and then realized that property management is not me. And so as I looked at other opportunities, I found my way towards real estate. With my background growing up in a small little farm town in Minnesota, I just grew up very blue collar. I worked in blue collar oil fields. Ultimately, that got me to industrial real estate as being kind of the place I need to be.
So you started off with the brokerage or at the brokerage immediately, right?
Yes, correct.
And how'd you, first couple weeks as a broker, you're kind of just drinking out of a fire hose. How do you learn about commercial real estate, like in the capacity that you have now?
Yeah, so I would describe it as it was I can't even say first couple months, which is what I was expecting to drink through a fire hose. It ended up being what felt like the first couple years. And even now, there's still so much that nuance that you can learn. Yeah. The thing that helped me as I grew into what I am today is I was able to join a team with my now partner, Philip, two other gentlemen that were older in the business. And one of those gentlemen, I refer to him as the godfather of industrial real estate for Salt Lake City. And he just he was a broker for 40 years. He retired right before COVID, he kind of retired out. But I got an opportunity to spend like a good 3-4 years just like absorbing his knowledge as much as I could.
I think that's the difference between like residential real estate and commercial real estate is you really do, it is more of an apprentice model.
Absolutely.
And so he started, I mean, I can't imagine the changes that he's seen over the years.
Yes.
So, okay. So, and you're doing mostly big box industrial stuff now. How has the kind of industrial market changed since you got in the business?
Yeah, I have been in this business 7 years. And over that 7 years, I have seen just continued growth and interest in Salt Lake City. I'm sure many of the people on your podcast talk about like the growth trajectory of Salt Lake. So I don't probably need to get into that too much. But it's just really, I think, a being at the right place at the right time. And as we experience in all areas of real estate, we are in a great place that is growing and building out at a very high rate. And then we add what happened with COVID of people feeling locked up and held in one place and wanting to get more open space. And so a lot of people from the East and a lot of people from the West Coast found their way to the Salt Lake area, and it just like turned it up to 10.
So I've talked kind of extensively about why Salt Lake is so great from a demographic and population, that type of stuff. But let's talk about how industrial is so great in Salt Lake City from a user standpoint, like rail lines and infrastructure and that type of stuff. So I guess let's start off with, why would someone, if you're a third party logistics company, why would you come to Salt Lake instead of Denver?
Great. Yeah. Honestly, like I might get some flack on this. So I think they say in podcasts, leave your comments, but, although like Denver is often looked at as a gateway to the West, I really think that Salt Lake is really positioned much better for anything that if you want to have a one-stop shop to hit the whole West Coast, we're really centrally located for it to be, roughly a day's journey from anything from Phoenix up to Boise to Los Angeles, San Francisco. About the only thing we can't get in one day is Seattle. And Seattle is just outside of that window. So like very centrally located to the west. In the industrial world, we care a lot about just like road infrastructure and transportation infrastructure. We've got great rail lines that come from like the Port of Long Beach out of California, is kind of our main hub. That's a Union Pacific line. But there's also good other rail lines as well that go to other parts of like the Pacific Northwest. But our big thing is we've got I-15 that goes north and south, which is a major arterial interstate, as well as I-80 east and west. And so those are just things that I think make us a really good story of like a crossroads to the west.
And you talk about a day's drive. I think a lot of people don't understand kind of the logistics side of industrial. Mm-hmm. They see Amazon in their boxes, they show up, and that's kind of the extent of it. But, I guess let's talk a little bit more in depth about the need of that infrastructure in place. Like let's talk for a second about how goods get delivered across the country. What options do you have? You have the rails, you have your trucks. Like when you say a day's drive, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is where I can nerd out.
Great.
Where we can talk about like, we talk about like demographics, but also just like a thing that like really sets America apart is we can move product in pretty much any way, where a lot of other just countries across the world are limited to usually like rail is kind of the main infrastructure that they use. But for us, just the way we are set up, our navigable waterways, by far the cheapest way to move a box is to put it on a boat. Next is going to be a rail line, and then from there a semi truck, and then a box truck, and then a pickup truck all the way down to your car. Like every time you touch that, like it just gets a little bit more expensive for what you can move. And so the way we are set up, like we are a high desert, so we don't have a lot of navigable waterways here. But what we do have is we have a direct link from Port of Long Beach, which is a massive, massive receiver of goods that come from the Pacific, like the East Asian markets can come into the Port of Long Beach. And this even ties into a buzzword that you will see in the newspaper around the inland port. Part of the reason the inland port is even a play is because the Port of Long Beach has become like basically reaching its maximum capacity of warehousing. And so what they want to do is just put product on the rail, bring it directly to Salt Lake, where they will then do customs processing and warehouse it here, just to be a relief valve for Los Angeles.
Let's take a sidebar and just talk about the inland port. Sorry, I didn't prep you for this whatsoever.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
So let's talk about the inland port. There's the hub and the different spokes. So let's inland port 101. Where do we start?
This is going to be a conversation that's a little bit outside of my pay grade. I am more on the brokerage side, reactive to obviously what policy comes down. I will also say that like there are a lot of moving parts around what that looks like. When I started in this business, 7 years, I mean, I feel like it's been like 5-6 years that we've been talking about an inland port. And I have heard many different iterations of what that's going to look like. As you talked about, like a hub and spoke model, where the Inland Port Authority is now involved in projects all the way down like to the Cedar City area, to help, basically move goods that we have like back to have that go east. But we're also like expecting product that is going to continue to come in from the West Coast towards us. And so like it's a bit of a moving target right now, but we have heard everything from like having an intermodal type port, as I just described, where they want to be able to, instead of doing customs in California, just have the ships come into port, have the containers go onto a train, and that train comes here directly. And then we do the processing here just to be, as I said, a relief valve. I think that that's still a potential. But there's also been some changes even around like demographics, that model may not be the model moving forward that is needed. But a lot of it's still up in the air.
And so we've got a couple different projects. I guess let's speak to, we've got the Grantsville Inland Port. There's the Salt Lake City Airport Inland Port, Spanish Fork, and I'm blanking on the other ones, but can you give some perspective as to the size of those projects? Like they're millions of square feet.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that's currently being built out. Initially, when we talked about the inland port, there was kind of the area directly west of the airport that was kind of like just eyed as like, we want this to be kind of an inland port hub. Currently, that's called the Salt Lake Global Logistics Hub. That's currently being built out by the Colmena Group, primarily Wadsworth as well. And what is kind of coming out of that is like right now, like as they are still trying to decide what inland port means, we've just had so much growth during COVID that they are just building spec warehouses like as quickly as they have been able to. Obviously, that's slowing down a little bit as we're in the uncertainties, but right now we just need more product, and we have limited land available that can be designated for industrial real estate.
And I think when I first started looking at industrial real estate, I kind of didn't really know why anyone would choose Grantsville over Salt Lake City, over Spanish Fork. So I just looked at them as big boxes. So if I'm a industrial user, one, who am I? And two, what am I really looking for?
That is a really broad question, and I will try to answer
Perfect.
Quasi specifically so that people can kind of get an idea. The answer is, if you are an industrial user, certain boxes like fit your boxes. And so if you are, for instance, Amazon, they are looking for large warehouses because they have a ton of product that they want to be able to get to different parts of the country within 2 days is their main point. And honestly, the goal is to solve the last mile constraints, which we'll probably have to unpack that, to be able to do that even quicker. Because ultimately consumers, they want to click send or they want to click buy online, and they want their product to be in their hand as soon as possible. And so like Amazon has a model of like, they are trying to right now get it to you within 2 days, and they're trying to tighten that just because that's their competitive advantage. But then as you go down from large, massive occupiers like Amazon, which roughly they control about 10% of all the industrial real estate in our market, which is
crazy.
Like we're a roughly 250 million square foot market in Salt Lake. And to think about that, they control 10% of that.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of square foots.
Yeah.
That's a lot of square foots.
Yeah.
And so as you go down, then you have different users. Like because we are such a growing area, like we're building out. And so like I have a client that is an electrical distributor of like just utilities equipment. And so like they do like things like electrical switchgear and like the lights in this office.
Tell them to hurry up.
Yes. Yeah, I know. They agree. But like they just provide products, even like the posts that run power lines and the fiber optic cable. Like all of these people are industrial users. And so as your listeners drive down the road and they think about an industrial user that is even the road you're driving on, the tires, all of those people are industrial occupiers in our market. Even the electrician that wires these lights in this office, they are all people that are looking for certain size boxes.
And so, I mean, if I'm a third-party I want to back up, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of industrial users are, like a lot of industrial buildings are built spec. They're not built to suit like retail. So if I'm a developer and I've got, 100 acres out in West Valley or something, and I say, John, what should I build? How's that conversation even begin?
Yeah, it's that's a great question, because when you talk about 100 acres, we are more of a market. I mean, outside of like a few projects that have over 100 acres, we are really more of a market that it's like, if you can tie up 10 acres, 20 acres, 5 acres, like those are kind of the sizes that we build to. If we were sitting in Phoenix right now, where they have vast plots of land available, and my Phoenix boys,
We would be so
don't
scared
hate on me,
if we were in
but
Phoenix.
like here's a statistic for you. Like we were really proud of ourselves. Like we developed like, I think it was 12 million square feet of industrial real estate last year. And we were like, man, look at us. Because we used to be like, when I started in this business, if you developed 4 million square feet, you were like, we're doing well. You go to Phoenix last year, I believe they developed 42 million square feet. And that's Phoenix. Like it's a different, like we are an inland, like we are a smaller market.
Okay. So we'll say we tie up 10 acres or something like that.
Yes.
Maybe we can talk about what you refer to as the greatest industrial building ever on 2200 North and 2200 West.
Yes.
What makes the building so great? Because from, me 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I'd look at that and say that box looks exactly like every other box, but you think it's better. So what makes it better?
Yeah. The specific project you are referring to is a project that's actually listed by other brokers in my office. And I think they've leased it all up. It's called the North Point project, just off of 2200 West and 2200 North. It's a great project as far as like the buildings that they put up. And I will be honest, like when they first told us, I think it was like probably 4 years ago, right before COVID, that they were going to be building these smaller bay buildings up in that area, there was some hesitancy, because before COVID, it was like, smaller bay industrial. And when I say small bay, this is like you can put up walls down to like 10,000 square feet a piece, or even less, like 5,000 square feet. Those are what we would call small bay. In our market, more like medium box would be kind of in the like 200,000 to 350,000 square foot range, where then you can demise it usually into like quarters or half. And then above that, we would kind of say like, I would say 500,000 square feet, and larger buildings up to like, typically we max out at about 1 million square feet. We would call that big box. And so the reason I said I love those buildings is, one, the the cost to build, like we talk about like economies of scale, like if you buy a million widgets, it's a pretty low number if you instead of buying like 100 of those same widgets. Like there's just economies of
Yeah.
scale. Same in industrial real estate. But as money was cheap and as people were building out very, very fast during COVID, an area that has just been overlooked is smaller bay product. And that's what that North Point project really has hit on is it's class A, but really small bay, so that if you are a plumber or if you are a small like truck accessories group, you need a place to hang your hat, and you also want to have like a place that you feel good about your customers coming to. And there's just not a lot of class A product in that size range. And so that's why I'm like, it's a brilliant building and it works really well. And as you drive through our market, like I have other places I can nerd out on that I think is just well placed, well positioned, and it's small bay that just doesn't exist.
And so when you say it's well placed, like what does that mean?
Yeah. So, this goes into more of the transportation side of industrial is that like, similarly as you probably have talked about demographics, right now I'm making a triangle, which is actually a Christmas tree. And the ideal demographics for people is to have like kind of that Christmas tree look where on the bottom you have a lot of young people. And then as you go up, you have less older people. And the same can be said for the demographics of industrial occupiers. Like there are many, many, many people that want to occupy 5,000 to 10,000 square feet or 3,000 square feet. There's only 8 or 10 people that will be in the market looking for 1,000,000 square feet. And so the reason that like I think smaller bay product is interesting, especially for like a developer such as yourself, is if you can capture smaller tenants, and then as you are building out your portfolio of projects, you could potentially continue to help the small tenants grow into larger tenants, and then even larger tenants. And like you can do that very well. And I think that there's just really interesting opportunities in that.
And if you're listening to this wanting to invest in small bay industrial, you know where to find me. Okay, so lots of deals have been built. I mean, we talked about Phoenix and their supply.
Yes.
Let's talk about supply moving forward. You know, we've got some big inland port projects, but we also are starting to run out of land, and we have kind of a shaky economy, rising interest rates, lots of uncertainties in the market. What is your view of the supply versus demand and prices falling and distress? It's a loaded question, but where do you see it?
Yes. This is where I would love to have a crystal ball, and I would love to maybe edit this piece of the podcast and then interview me in 6 months and then clip it back in, because the answer is we ultimately, like, there's still a lot of uncertainty. I will say that like right now we're still seeing some building happening. But that is obviously, there's a lot of projects that have gone from like under construction to on hold. And a lot of that is just around like, if they already have capital commitments from their like capital partners, if that money has already been committed to them, they're going to probably move forward with it, which I am very bullish of that, because we still have a pretty low vacancy rate, even though we've been like in the past building buildings like crazy. We're still absorbing that very well. And that's better than the national average. And so as we move forward, there's kind of a, like, this is where the uncertainty comes, is even if like I said this last year, even if the amount of tenants we have in the market cut in half, we can still absorb that with the amount of product that we're bringing to market, because at the time we were in like a pre-leasing scenario where it's like the building wasn't even built and people were signing leases. Now we are moving into a place where we're kind of just going back to pre-COVID life, like the 2018, 2019 world, where like you build your spec building and then there are tenants that are looking at 5 or 6 options, and then making a decision on that. So we're kind of going back to what the normal was, but now if all these projects are on hold, will there be an increase in demand, or will that demand start to slow down and then we see an increase of supply? I am of the opinion that I think we are going to see enough activity on the demand side to outpace supply, and I think we're still going to have scarcity in the industrial market.
And a lot of the vacancy that I've seen, I mean, I'm not a broker, but a lot of the vacancy that I've seen is on the fairly large boxes,
Yes.
300, 400, 500,000 square feet. Where do you see that starting to taper off? Like who's still in the market and who's kind of out?
Yeah. So where I am at today, my partner Philip Eilers and I, we have a couple projects that I think are kind of in the sweet spot of sizing in our market, kind of in the like 150 to 250,000 square foot range is kind of like an ideal, because then you can break that down into kind of like 50-ish thousand square foot, or like 100 to 150, where I see a lot of activity in that range. We have seen it slow down as far as like urgency to do a deal, but we still have a lot of interested occupiers coming into the market and touring, and like they have interest in doing something. It's just people have really like are kind of trying to wait out and see if there's going to be some fallout and pricing goes down, or what that looks like. But so far, like we still are currently making deals in line with what we made deals at, a year ago.
And who are these people that are still in the market? Are they all logistics people? Are they, service providers? Who's interested and who's not, I guess?
Yeah, I would say that we are more seeing people like where they like are providing a product. Like I would say that we have everything from groups that they just need a place to build pallets to put product on, to people that are like they have like tire distributors and manufacturers are still in the market. Honestly, what I would say is the world has been so crazy over the last 3 years out of our COVID situation, that was where like a lot of the large scale occupiers, like if you would say, I'm just trying to think of brands, like let's say it was like a Home Depot or a Lowe's or an Amazon, they were very active trying to gobble up as much as they could. But that pushed out smaller occupiers that were in the 50 to 100,000 square foot range, that I don't want to call them mom and pop, but like more owner operators, owner users as we would call them. So this has kind of been their like window to step into the market and be able to get space that, instead of competing for something that wasn't even built and having 3 offers on it, kind of like almost like the housing market, to where it's kind of come back down to where they can look at product, think on it, look at it again, think on it some more, and then be like, okay, this is the best fit for us.
And are you seeing, we talk about vacancy on the big box stuff. Are those developers trying to convert into smaller bays? Because it's really difficult from a construction standpoint. It's expensive, number
Yes.
one. A lot of the time, these buildings aren't really set up to be demised that small. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm going to give you the best answer ever, and that it depends.
Yeah.
Because like there are the way these buildings are built, like if it gets more desperate, like desperate times call for desperate measures, and so like they will be able to kind of work with some stuff to make it doable. But buildings are really designed, like if you drive by an industrial building now and you look at what we would call the storefronts, which is where like the office areas, as we would call them office pods, will go, you kind of can see what the building is designed for. Like some buildings will be designed for like where they have 2 office pods on the corners. And so it's like that building is kind of designed to like split down the middle or like give you a little bit more or a little bit less. And so you're looking for like someone in the 100,000 square foot range or whatever that might be. As you go into larger buildings, they're kind of designed for like usually like on the corners again, and then maybe they'll do one in the middle. So you could have like 4 to maybe 6 occupiers that you're kind of targeting. As I said, desperate times call for desperate measures. So will there be a day where it's like, okay, we got to really like carve out and like cut into the building and create another storefront? I don't know. I don't think that's going to be the case because I think there's enough activity because we are growing. As we continue to grow, people need product. Like we are a consumer-driven economy. So I think that'll be okay. But where we've gone from like, hey, we're only willing to do a full building user, people are now willing to do a half building or a quarter building that they wouldn't. But a cost that people don't think about is just even the wall that we would call the demising wall to like split that in half. Those costs have been very expensive because our buildings aren't like, like 10 feet like your house tall on the inside. We're talking like 28, 32, 36, or 40 feet up to the ceiling of what we would call the clear height. So like the bottom of like the truss system or rafters. So like to put up that wall is a lot more expensive than to like, reconfigure your bathroom.
That's my, I guess, bullish case for small bay industrial is, can't chop a 1 million square foot building up into, little 5,000 square foot bays. So,
That is absolutely correct. Otherwise you would have some bowling alleys.
yes, we would. It'd be kind of fun though. So who typically owns these buildings? Because these are huge, huge buildings. We're talking like acres rather than square feet. So that's not really mom and pop owner territory on the big stuff.
Yeah. So a lot of the bigger ones, once again, the answer depends. On the really big companies, like there's a lot of private equity groups that have their hands in it. Or, like you get into like REITs and life insurance companies. Like when you buy a whole life insurance policy on yourself, they have to do something with that money and invest it into something. And they will put that into things like real estate and big industrial buildings. Teacher pension funds. There's usually like equity groups that have like tied themselves with like pensions and stuff like that. So like
mostly institutional.
Yeah. A lot of institutional. As you go smaller, like there are, the largest industrial building owner is a guy.
Yeah.
In our Salt Lake Valley. And so there are cases for all, but like for the most part, right now we see a lot of institutional money that has been buying stuff up.
That guy, John Price. That's who you're referring to, right?
So this would be
you're talking about what's his name in West Valley?
Yes,
Yeah.
Freeport West.
Yes.
Is the entity that he owns.
Yeah.
And like he's the, I'm currently working on a deal right now with his broker in the market, and he's like, when you get me an offer, I'm going to put it on his desk, and he's going to look at it and decide. The other guy you're referring to is Steve Price. John Price is his father.
Yes.
And Steve Price is a local developer, and controls a lot of square footage here as well. And has been very smart and like very wise in how he approaches his business. But they're more regional or local developers.
Yeah. I would love both of those guys' portfolios. I love Price's portfolio and
Yes.
Draper. I mean, that's like impeccable. So
Yeah.
If he ever wants to sell, just tell him to give me a call.
We'll get this out to the right people on this podcast.
Of course. Okay. There's a lot of components in these industrial buildings that are, I think, overlooked. There's a bunch of numbers and words on LoopNet saying this type of power and this type of phase. What do these tenants? Why do they require so much power in the first place? And two, what are they doing with it?
Oh gosh, another like we
Loaded
could spend
question.
hours just on like all the different types of users and the types of needs that they have. I would say one of our clients, they make different things out of plastic that they heat up, and then they will basically make different products just out of like sheets of like thin plastic. One of the things that they have been really successful at is they make a product that goes over like power lines. Like if you remember when Northern California wildfires were on were
Yeah.
because
When
of
California was on fire.
yeah, when California was on fire, like I think that they've gotten a pretty awesome contract to now basically put these plastic protectors, and I am not doing it justice describing what it actually is, but it covers the power line like at all of the all the junctions, so that like if a bird lands on it, the bird doesn't like. I'm really sorry for the people that care about their animals, but sometimes birds will land on a power line in the right way and start on fire. And that's where we got the Northern California fires, I believe. So don't fact check me on that, but, or actually you can. But like I say all of that, that's a long winded answer to say that in order to heat up that plastic, they can't use like an open flame. They have to use basically a really large version of your stove, your electric stovetop or your oven to heat that up. And that takes a lot of power. And so for them, they can use, like in most houses, like a fairly new house will have a 200 amp service, probably 100 amp service. And most standard industrial real estate will have like a couple hundred amps on the smaller side available to use. Those guys use like 1,000 amps. I have an occupier that does something in like the air products. They needed 10,000 amps of power at 3-phase. And so you can Google like what is electricity like. You have 120 volts out of your house typically. Your clothing dryer will be 220 volts. And then from there you double that and you go up to 480. In our world, we live a lot in the 220 to 480 volts range. And then as far as amperage, every electronic that you have, if you look, there's a sticker on it that will tell you how many amps. Just even your little product. For us, it's a lot of milliamps, but every consumer product has a like little sticker on it that tells you volts and amps, and you can create the watts and all this stuff. So yeah, like there are manufacturers that need a lot of power. And then there are people that have like a bunch of boxes in their warehouses, and outside of the electric forklift that they use that has to charge the battery, they're pretty low power users.
I want to have like an electrical engineer just come on and just talk about electricity for like an hour sometime.
Thank you, because I know what I am, and I am a broker of industrial real estate.
Brokers and engineers, usually there's not a lot of overlap there.
I just have a little bit of knowledge about a lot of little things.
Same with me. Okay, so I want to talk about the future of industrial. So Price family, I think they've been very forward-looking in their way that they've built their industrial buildings. I guess let's compare and contrast how industrial buildings have evolved since you got started even 5-7 years ago versus what they're being built today. Higher clear heights, different loading docks and that type of stuff. And where do other people and yourself see it heading?
Yeah, good question. This is another crystal ball question. I can tell you ideas that are out there. A really big term in industrial real estate is what is the like clear height, which is as I talked about, like the bottom of the roof system or the trusses or the rafters, whatever you want to call it. What is that clear height from the floor to the ceiling, basically? In the industrial world, back in the mid 50s, they invented this thing called the Sealand container. And that really started a revolution of how to optimize shipping products. And this is where I could totally nerd out for a while on how like a 40-foot Sealand container has you want to go down the road?
Yeah,
okay. So in the late 50s, they decided, like, before that, every time that like boxes were on a ship, for the most part, it was pretty much hand loaded or like a variation of mechanical hand loading. But then they started moving down the path of like, well, if we put it on a thing called a pallet, which you guys know what a 4x4 pallet is, then we can put all those boxes pre-stacked and then put them on the boat. And then they came out with the Sealand container that is 40 foot by 8 by 8, or you can do 20 foot Sealand containers about half the size. But everything in industrial real estate is kind of built around the concept of a pallet, which a pallet is going to be Standardized, there are exceptions to the rule like everything, but standardized, it's like a 4x4x4 foot pallet with boxes on that. So it's just a cube. And so in industrial real estate, everything is built around that. When I got into this business, like we were talking about a 28-foot clear. So 28 divided by 4, that tells you how many pallets you can stack on top of each other.
7, by the way. Quick
There
math.
you go.
Yeah.
I like it. But depending on your sizing, even that changes. So like, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago, a 24-foot clear building was like, man, this is a future-proof building. And then it was like, well, what do we need to build now? Because as technology improves, as material handling improves, that has continued to grow. And so now in our world, when I started in this business, a 28-foot clear building was like, that's a great Class A building. Like in the smaller size, kind of what I'm talking about would be like roughly 200,000 square feet. Like 28-foot clear was like down the runway. Now the expectation is moving towards 32-foot clear for that same size building.
Is there any reason, or is it just like we want to be able to fit more stuff in here?
It's more, I think this is another thing that like if you brought on a industrial developer or like someone, more in this world, they will give you a more specific reason. For what I see it as is I view it as like future-proofing a building as what we're talking about is as technology continues, will there be a desire for more pick placements to go up to 32-foot clear or 36-foot clear or now 40-foot clear on the like million square foot buildings? But within that, they may not, like the future may not be, let's just stack it from floor to ceiling with racking all the way up to the ceiling. There may come a time, this is where you get into kind of more of the online Amazon-y type stuff.
The robots.
Yes, where they may put in what we would call a mezzanine or basically a second floor within these buildings. And so as developers are future-proofing their portfolio, they're thinking about the potentials like that. I think another thing we've talked about is like, will drone deliveries become a thing? And we know of developers that are starting to talk about building infrastructure into their building, whether or not they like have it built out as like, you think of like the Empire State Building, the spire or like the tall part on that was designed for like blimps to connect to it. Like that's why it's on there.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. If you research that. And so like, will they put in drone capable buildings day one? Or are they just kind of setting it up for the ability to have drones to be able to like fly out of there like you see on movies?
Maybe we'll get stuff from blimps. Who knows?
I don't know what the future holds.
We should do that.
Yeah.
Kind of random question on the future. Why is Prologis not in Salt Lake yet? Do you have any idea?
So Prologis had some buildings, and they are actually they have tied up some land out in the Grantsville Tooele market that they are actually just coming back into the market.
Okay.
So yes, another like they are a national developer, but like they do some really interesting stuff. Something that like you can do some research on this, but if you just Google Prologis multi-story industrial,
we'll put it in the show notes.
Yes. Yeah. They're doing because like this goes down. Now we're going to go another rabbit hole of like the future being the hardest thing to solve in logistics is the final mile. And right now you see an Amazon truck or a UPS truck, or you see someone that is like basically Ubering with their own car and dropping off your package on your front step. Those steps are expensive. And the closer they can get to our houses with industrial like warehouse holding facilities, the cheaper that gets. We've seen different attempts. Like Walmart had like a final mile where it's like, they would drop off all the packages and then they would give you like a code to get into, basically
like a locker.
A locker. Yep. Yeah. Like we've seen that attempted, but Prologis did this building in Seattle, which this has happened in like the Asian markets, but like a multi-story industrial building which is pretty crazy to look at. Once again, for me, it's an opportunity to nerd out. For you, it's just to kind of have an idea of like, oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's just supply constraints at the end of the day. Like in Seattle, you can't build a 1,000,000 square footer. So you've got to build, 3 levels of, 300,000 square feet, right?
Correct. Yeah. And so all of those things, like those are plays that I think we're going to see more of that in the future as land continues to go up, and the opportunities, because it's like, I don't know a lot of cities that are like, it would be awesome for our downtown skyline, a 3-story industrial building. Let's create zoning that allows for an industrial building to be downtown.
I would love to build the first downtown industrial skyscraper. So if any city planners are listening, let me know.
Open your minds.
Yes.
Open your minds.
I think it'd be awesome. Okay. I think this has been awesome. Industrial 101. I've learned a lot.
Absolutely. They're like, this is just scratching the surface. And I just want to thank you for letting me nerd out for a little while and share my passion for big boxes.
I share the same.
I love it.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.